Good evening and welcome once again. Tonight, we embark on a journey toward Ireland, an island enshrouded in mist and memory, kneaded with the flour of history and the leaven of myth. Before you lies the sweeping saga of Irish mythology, a vast tapestry stretching from the very creation of the world to the legendary ages of heroes. These are the unforgettable chronicles of gods and warriors, of love, loss, and transformation. They carry us back to an ancient time where every hill, every river, and every stone possessed a name, and every name carried a story of its own. Our point of departure is one of the oldest peoples said to have walked these lands, the mysterious Tuatha Dé Danann. We shall witness the resistance of this ancient folk, masters of magic and lore, against giants and invaders. We will meet courageous heroes like Cú Chulainn and Fionn mac Cumhaill, wandering through realms where time flows differently and dreams take physical form. Each myth is a fragment of a cycle kept alive through generations by poets and storytellers, the shapers of breath, who gave voice to a nation's soul. As always, I would love to know where in the world you are and at what hour you are listening to us. If you enjoy these tales, please remember to comment and subscribe to the channel. Supporting this channel is the simplest way to help us, and it means the world to me. Thank you for being here. Now, let us begin. The Silent Island and the First Wave. There is an ancient way of telling the story of Ireland. History does not begin with kings upon thrones or saints illuminating manuscripts. It begins with a silent island, restlessly waiting for the sound of footsteps. The winds blew across those lands long before words or names ever existed. The waves write upon the sand only to erase it instantly. The hills wait as if holding their breath. The first journeys into that deep silence were not accidents, but the fruit of a conscious choice. Extraordinary pilgrims who believed they could build a new world upon the remains of one that never truly was. The medieval sages compiled these old tales in the Book of Invasions, Lebor Gabala Erin. In these accounts, every wave is remembered as a conquest of Ireland. Yet this is not a boast. It is the expression of a compact between the people and the land, a treaty that must be renewed in every age.
The first wave begins with wonder and profound sorrow. The story tells of the journey of Cessair, a testament to extraordinary perseverance whose many paths eventually converged into a single pool. Cessair heard that the world would be overwhelmed by a great flood. Though gripped by fear, she did not flee her destiny. She set out with 3 men and 50 women in her wake. Fintan mac Bocra, Bith, and Ladra accompanied her, searching for that mysterious island of high green pastures and deep waters whispered of in rumors. Finally, they made landfall at the point where the cliffs lowered their guard. They gave names to the shores and the headlands. As they began their lives, the wind combed the grass. Seagulls shrieked, their cries echoing over the running waters. The business of living was conducted, followed by the rising of songs. Waves of relief followed the sense of achievement, filling the soul. People cut timber, cleared the brush, and created new openings. Thus, a legendary beginning took shape. The Witness of Ages. A single year is not a long time in the lifespan of a world, but the world decided to keep its promise. The waters rose. The place once seen as a safe haven turned into a tiny vessel upon a vast gray sea. People died. Men and women vanished one by one. Only Fintan survived, and his story is told with an awe-inspiring simplicity. He endured by taking on the forms of creatures that could survive within a strange, new world. First, he became a salmon, drifting his mind like a candle through the cold currents of the river. Then, he transformed into an eagle that could see the shape of the island from above. Finally, he became a hawk, witnessing the passing of winters like the turning pages of a book. Fintan lived on, but survival brought a heavy burden. He would live long enough to remember everything. In the ages to come, he would recount the past to kings. Priests would ask him which island it was where the first lines were written upon the grass. Eventually, the waters receded, and the island took a fresh breath. As the oak trees slowly grew, the seals forgot and then returned, and time began to rebuild itself.
Another fleet arrived at the same shore. These people, led by Partholon, were not idealists fleeing an ancient apocalypse. They were settlers who came with intent and skill to till the earth. They were masters of cattle rearing, sowing seeds, and the arts of husbandry. They touched the fields, brewed ale, and eventually learned to sit together at the table, calling this peace. They gathered in the fields, their muffled conversations dividing the labors of the day. They counted with excitement the plains and clear lakes that opened beneath their hands. In this story, for the first time, a map appeared, not drawn by the gods or the random forces of nature, but by human toil. Now the well where a woman sought water had a name of its own. A man, returning home in the twilight with his tired dog and aching back, returned to familiar lands where he could find his way. However, the old inhabitants of Ireland were still there, and not all were hospitable. From the west came the Fomorians, invaders and leaders of the kind poets would deem supernatural. They were like hunger given shape, fear itself in human form. The shadow of the Fomorians. While the Tuatha Dé Danann would later appear representing grace, skill, and beauty, the Fomorians were described by the harshness of storms, rocks, and teeth. In some tales, they're giants. In others, they are humans possessing a giant's cruelty. The people of Partholon met them at Mag Eth. This grass-covered plain seems to bear the footprints of armies forever. Sensing defeat, the Fomorians retreated. Indeed, they were driven back to the coast by the fear of a people who knew they would lose everything they had learned to love if they were conquered. For a time, Ireland was populated by people who maintained their settlement at a heavy price. Eventually, that price was paid, and the reign of the newcomers ended. A plague arrived, an enemy that could neither be met with a spear nor suppressed with courage. The disease claimed the settlers, accelerating their sorrowful fate and catching them all in the silence of a low hill. The fields grew over with weeds once more. The cattle wandered aimlessly, and the hearths went cold in silence.
The sea remained the same. It does not forget, but it does not remember. Again, silence, and then a sail. Nemed brought a weary people ready to fight. They knew the stories of the land. They built, and they watched the sea. This time, the Fomorians returned not as raiders, but as lords demanding tribute. Their demands were merciless: grain, milk, and children. On Samhain, the night the old year ends, the myths of Ireland were woven with blatant tyranny. This was more than mere atrocity. It was a season kneaded with hunger and blood. Nemed defended his people, experiencing both victories and losses. The Fomorian tower on Tory Island was finally seized. The sea met the warriors' courage with a cold reality. The Fomorian leader, Mork, arrived with a fleet as cruel as winter. The slaughter began. Leaders fell, and the people scattered. Children watched with hollow eyes. Their futures had been snatched away.
the Fir Bolg and the 5 provinces. It did not end there. The survivors were scattered to different paths, to the cold lands of the north, to Britain, or to realms where golden hills lured them into slavery. To the slaves, heavy sacks were given. As their names were erased, they were given the title Fir Bolg, meaning men of the bags. Humiliation and resistance became intertwined. One day they returned. Ireland welcomed them with wind and a weary mercy. They were no longer raiders, but permanent dwellers. They carved their own memory into the island by dividing it into 5 provinces, and the 5 sons of Dela are remembered as the architects of this partition. Everyone took a share. The division of the land was actually a treaty to protect it. The High King Heochad mac Irk is praised once more as one who prioritized justice and the welfare of the people. The Fir Bolg were not a storm, but a society of settlers. They developed traditions of law and assembly. As they walked the old plains, their footprints showed that the ancient compact between man and island was being renewed. Beyond the furs-covered ridges, the Fomorians still existed, but they had largely lost their power. Still, they raided and continued to hunt.
The sea was their ally. The Fir Bolg learned that a piece of land could be governed from within, while under threat from without. There was no single war that ended the threat, only small skirmishes difficult to recount, for they took place far from the eyes of historians or poets. We are wise enough to say that courage requires no witness. The breadth of the land. In this age, the land itself is like a character in the story. New lakes might appear. Plains are cleared unexpectedly. Ancient texts speak with praise of the counts of 4s and 5s. In the age of Partholon, 4 lakes emerged. Nemed and his people cleared 12 plains despite the storms. In the Fir Bolg period, 5 provinces endured. Counting was a way of holding the island in the mind. It also implied that old gods and powers were active beneath the earth. Lakes appearing suddenly were not simple natural events. This story draws attention to both the land and those who live upon it. The name of Sisa, one of the first female leaders, is mentioned. She was a figure who did not remain in the shadow of men and who challenged the sea. Among later leaders, Tailtiu, AIU, symbolized that women were not merely behind the warriors, bearing the title of queen. Old tales remind us that the management of fields and the protection of nature were the work of women. To understand Ireland, one must see not only the lone warriors, but the long, patient generations of women who sustained the people through their labor. The horizon of change. Though the Fomorians are often remembered as enemies of light, they are part of the order. Some genealogies make them kin to the Tuatha Dé. They have a past of marrying kings. The sea cannot be excluded from the island. One can only bargain with it, fear it, but ultimately it must be accepted. The Fomorians carry the nature of the sea. They bring danger, trade, and the reality that no abundance comes for free. The tribute demands of their leaders arose from the realization that there are necessities beyond nature. The lands that feed the people have a price.
The Fomorians are like the upright manifestation of these necessities. Looking back, the story of the bag-carrying folk shines with a certain dignity. They were neither gods nor giants. They were humans who suffered and returned. They ruled, and sometimes that was the most admirable story of all. By preserving the unity of the island,
they prepared the ground for new adventures. They were not even aware they were doing so. Fields, borders, and disputes awaited them. They set and implemented their own laws. They offered even the High King a throne that existed within justice. Stories were told stating that the first usurpations contained moral lessons. The visions of disaster, the brave rise and fall of Partholon, the bitter lessons of the Nemedian years, and the resilience of the Fir Bolg, each period was filled with its own unique triumphs and losses. They patiently shaped new borders and names, but this story was not limited to a beginning. The lands already felt the pulse of life, like a choir ready for song. While the hills of Tara carried the soul of the kingdom, the River Boyne learned to be a border and a path, and the Shannon became an inspiration for both death and life. Those who came did not step into a void, but into a ready world. Their voices were sometimes a consolation, sometimes a warning. This choir will always continue. The Fomorians will not vanish, though they change shape and name. Social conflicts will persist. Between hunger and craft, passion and abundance, the story will go on. The division of the lands into provinces and the appointment of kings formed the foundation upon which future heroes would move. The story of the flood and a surviving witness carries the echo of a person who does not forget. The habit of paying a price for freedom in winter leaves a deep mark on the history of the island's people. Irish mythology reminds us that memory has many different voices. In one story, the Fir Bolg are the first proud humans. In another, they turn into a detail in the transition to the age of gods. Nemed is sometimes the creator of fields and the nightmare of pirates, sometimes merely the stone of a path. The diversity of the stories is a living proof of a deep-rooted tradition. People tell a new story about things that change in every period. When they long for moments of wonder, eyes turn to the horizon, to fleets adorned with lights. Like the immortal Fintan, we can stand on a cliff and see the past and the future at the same time. Where the sky meets the sea, we can discern Cesar's small boat. We can imagine the people of Partholon crossing a plain, or Nemedian warriors sprawled upon the sands in the cold moonlight. We can witness the silent moments when the Fir Bolg swore an oath to the earth.
The sea is both enemy and path. It is a master of indifference. The future approaches like the echoing footsteps of an army of gods. As the legend ends, the Fir Bolg fulfill their duty on the stage of history. They brought order and honor to their island. They fenced their fields, named their provinces, and created laws that protected the weak. However, by the nature of the tides, a new age was beginning. Toward the horizon, the people of the Tuatha Dé Danann advance. They blend magic with art, make wars as magnificent as dance, and make their kings shine with superior qualities. Though neither Arthur has appeared yet, their coming is felt in the wind. The scent of apple blossoms is the herald of the approaching transformation. We look once more at the island held by the Fir Bolg. Beneath a stony sky, greening lands, grazing cattle, and children playing joyfully on the paths. The smoke rising where the calm wind wraps around tells the silent song of the past and the future. Women, even 100 generations later, continue to grind grain, playing a melody that dwells in their souls even if they do not remember their mothers' names. Men, on the other hand, sharpen their spears not out of a desire for war, but knowing that peace requires a solid preparation. The lakes that appear from night to morning reflect the sunlight, watching the surroundings like eyes open to see the next stage. Rivers that would one day be the subject of oaths flow serenely, as if there were no reign of kings or turmoil of wars. Ireland is ready to be conquered anew and to host a brand new story. A brighter hand will write the compact between the land and the people. This brilliance will be too dazzling for some and a source of hopeful joy for others. The songs sung will now differ. Names whose value is understood centuries later will be sown as seeds into the soil. The first part carries the memory of hunger, labor, fear, and a vague hope felt like the wind before the rain. The second part is like a burning flame. At the edge of the world, a mass of clouds descends over the sea and moves toward Ireland, overflowing with thoughts. Sailors would later recount how ships lay hidden within those very clouds, blending into the waters only when they chose to reveal themselves. Others spoke of figures moving across the green ocean, like an army surrounded by shimmering light upon the waves. In both tellings, their arrival was of such noble stature that it could only be judged with the solemnity of a royal ceremony.
The Tuatha Dé Danann did not step upon these shores as mere wanderers. They arrived as heirs to a deep-rooted culture, as if they had always belonged. Their tongue was ancient, yet elegant, their craftsmanship so sublime that even mundane tasks appeared miraculous. Their musicians made silence as poignant as a cry, and their healers could cheat death itself, pulling the stricken back from the very brink of life. Their smiths commanded metal as intimately as a farmer knows his own field in the twilight. In the memory of the Irish, though kings may crumble into dust, their names endure like echoes. They brought with them the magical stone from Fallias, which cried out under a rightful king ruling with justice. From Gorius they brought the spear that never missed its mark. From Findius the sword from which no man could flee once unsheathed. And from Murius they offered the cauldron that was never empty and never refused a friend. These were not mere trinkets, they were testaments to a society touched by divine grace and blessed by good works. When they reached Connacht, they saw the winds embracing the grass with silver, while plumes of smoke from Fomorian hearths drifted ceaselessly toward the heavens. The conflict of two peoples. The Fomorians had held the island with order, law, and counsel. They were neither frail nor weak. They had divided their lands into perfectly harmonious provinces. At Tara, their high king sat not above the law, but within its bounds. The Tuatha stepped softly onto this soil, offering gifts, avoiding the clutter of excess as they prepared for an encounter. The two peoples first met upon the plain of May Turith for a simple offer of peace. If peace were possible, the champions would face each other first. Nuada, though not yet claiming the throne, bore himself with noble poise. Facing him was Srang, a formidable Fir Bolg warrior. Words were weighed at the meeting place. The Tuatha offered to share Ireland. The Fir Bolg, bound by pride and the belief that the land was indivisible, refused. They chose the hard path, and the armies gathered. After days of tension, war erupted. This was the first great trial of the Tuatha, and it lasted 5 days. The first day passed with minor gains and much clamor. On the second day, the clashes grew systematic. On the third, Sreng and Nuada met again. The battle became a cold display of skill. Nuada fell under a mighty blow, his right arm stubbornly resisting alongside his weapon. Both armies recoiled in horror. As the Tuatha withdrew their leader, the Fir Bolg stood tall in the heat of victory. On the fourth day, momentum shifted to the Fir Bolg. On the fifth, the Tuatha rallied for a final assault. Ogma pierced the enemy defenses, while the Dagda wielded his club,
a manifestation of divine power. The Morrigan summoned terror and victory from the shadows. Finally, the Fir Bolg retreated. The war ended. Though the land was reclaimed, there was no joy in victory. A compromise was struck between peace and fear. Sreng was granted land, his courage never forgotten. The island was vast enough to hold this history. Nuada, meanwhile, bore his scar with honor, the silver arm and the unworthy king. According to the laws of the Tuatha, a king's body must be blemishless. It symbolizes the fate of the country. Nuada could not sit upon the throne with a missing limb. The physician Dian Kecht treated him, while smiths and artisans crafted for him a silver arm. Now the king's shoulder was adorned not just with strength, but with symbolism. Nuada rose from his table, moving his new arm with ease. The court murmured in admiration, yet the laws were absolute. Even if the arm was made of silver, it was not flesh and bone. The throne had to pass to another. Bress was chosen as the new ruler, as dazzling as a god, as strong as a young oak. He was Tuatha by his mother and Fomorian by his father. Many saw this choice as a gateway to peace. But for others, it was a trial they did not need. Bress climbed to the summit of the kingdom with a confident smile and took his place at Tara. The court initially believed beauty and power would suffice, but they soon realized that a king without generosity is as inadequate as a winter without fire. Bress was hesitant with gifts and stingy with praise. He failed the sacred duty of hospitality. Poets found a cold welcome in his halls. Warriors were deprived of reward. Artisans presented their works only to be ignored. A small greed grew into a great flaw, for a king is a mirror in which the world sees itself enlarged. In Ireland, satire is not mere entertainment, it is a potent weapon.
This tool, sharpened by art, was wielded by a poet named Coyapri. Waking after a night of neglect, the poet felt thorny words of justice rising within him. He uttered a verse that silenced the sovereign more effectively than a spear. This was said to be the first satire of Ireland. The poem unseated Bress in the eyes of his people, as if invisible hands had snatched away his crown. The coming of Lugh. Shamed and defeated, Bress gave in to his rage and called upon his Fomorian kin from across the sea. Tributes were demanded of the Tuatha, and hostages were taken. The land groaned under a heavy rule, where kingship was seen as a right rather than a trust. But change arrived quietly. At the gates of Tara, a young man appeared. The gatekeeper blocked his way, claiming there was nothing the man could do that was not already provided for inside. The young man introduced himself as a smith. There was already a smith. A champion. A champion was present. A harper. There were harpers enough. A sorcerer. The hall was full of them. Finally, he smiled and stated he was the one person who was all of those things at once. Astonished, the gatekeeper reported this to Nuada, who asked to see the youth. When he stepped into the hall, he drew every eye like a star in the darkness. He revealed his name, Lugh, son of Chion, and, he added softly, grandson of Balor. He was called Samildanach, the many-gifted, a title earned through deeds rather than promises. Nuada set him trials that seemed impossible, yet Lugh overcame them with the grace of a dancer. He wrestled, he played, he sang, he dispensed justice and shattered false claims with a single word. He spoke to every master of art in the hall and proved himself their equal. He was not arrogant, but fate itself. The Second Battle of Mag Tuireadh. Lugh possessed the clarity of the artisan,
and the imagination of the poet. He carried the speed of the warrior and the patience of the judge. The Tuatha saw in him their own best qualities. Nuada watched and understood. The old king seemed whole again. Stories tell of how his silver arm was replaced with one of flesh, a miracle of healing and magic. The Tuatha did not win by iron alone, but by knowledge and the courage to endure it. Nuada stepped back and asked Lugh to take command. A king who knows when to retreat is as strong as the mountain peak. Preparation for war became an exhibition of art. Goibnu forged swords that sharpened with every blow. Creednu reinforced shields with shimmering rivets. Lukta shaped spears of ash that would not break.
The Morrigan walked at night, meeting the Dagda. Their conversation was not ordinary, but its outcome was certain, an oath of victory for the Tuatha. The Fomorians responded in kind. Balor was now an ancient grandfather, yet his gaze was as terrifying as ever. His life was a warning. Prophecy said his grandson would kill him. Thus he had locked his daughter Ethniu in a bronze tower. But prophecies are the most stubborn of destinies. Cian had reached the tower with cunning, and the union was written in the stars. Lu was the survivor of that prophecy, coming to Tara with a smile that hid a storm. The armies gathered at Sligo. Lu walked the ranks, speaking to each group in their own tongue. Before the battle, the Dagda infiltrated the Fomorian camp as a spy and a buffoon, gathering intelligence with dark humor. At dawn, the Morrigan stood upon the hill. Her voice rose like a great wave, promising victory and rebirth. The battle called its champions. Ogma dragged a Fomorian chief like a flood, but the Fomorians were the symbols of ruthlessness. Their ranks swallowed all blows. Balor remained motionless, the patient face of catastrophe. His terrible eyelid could only be raised by ropes. When lifted, it destroyed everything in its path. Fields withered, courage died, hope turned to ash. The Tuatha knew this destruction from lore, but facing that lethal gaze was different. Nuada died before Balor's eye was even fully open. Then Lu stepped forward. He moved with a mental alertness that had waited his whole life for this moment. As Balor ordered his men to lift the lid, the air grew heavy with a suffocating silence. Lu took his sling and cast the stone, not with anger nor fear, but with the stillness of a master. The stone met the eye and passed through the back of the head. The evil gaze turned back upon the Fomorians themselves. The spell was broken. They shattered. Balor's body collapsed like a ruined tower. The prophecy was fulfilled, not with a roar, but with the simplicity of a single stone. The music of the land and the hidden world. Bress was captured and pleaded for his life. Lu asked what he could offer. Bress promised to teach the people the secrets of the seasons, when to plow, when to sow, and how to harvest. Lu spared him. A victory that feeds the people is more valuable than one that merely feeds pride.
In a dark hall near a Fomorian port, Lu found the Dagda's harp. He called its name, and the instrument glided into his hands. He played 3 melodies. The first was so full of sorrow that all wept for their forgotten pains. The second overflowed with joy, making all forget their strife. The third was so peaceful that even in armor, men felt they could lay their heads down in safety. Nature was balanced. Winter gave way to spring, and Tara began to glow with gold. The Tuatha were not tyrants, but guardians. Under their aegis, the island became a place where skill and knowledge were cherished. Yet, wise ones felt the change coming. The Milesians, sons of Míl Espain, arrived from across the sea to claim the land. After storms and negotiations, a bittersweet partition was reached. The Milesians took the upper world, the open fields, the hall roofs, the smoking cattle pens. The Tuatha Dé Danann took the lower world, claiming the mounds, the hollows, and the ancient moonlight gathered in stone arches. This was not a defeat, it was a decision to defend the roots while others held the leaves. They became the Seath, the people of the mounds. Angus took the mound of Brú na Buena, becoming the lord of dreams and lovers. The Dagda retreated to the deep river sources, and Bridget wandered between the mounds like a nurse of the soul. Lugh never stayed in one place. He became the first spark in a hearth, or the shadow crossing a king's path at night. The world did not lose them, it simply learned to look at them with different eyes. A melody heard by a lonely man was not just the wind. A cow found at the end of a hard season was not just luck. There was an order, and the Tuatha blessed those who kept the traditions and respected the land. Though they moved into the shadows, their legacy remained. The stone at Tara would still recognize a true leader. The cauldron of the Dagda reminded rulers that abundance must be shared. As the Golden Age ended, the Tuatha did not see their end as a failure, but as a new contract to protect the earth from within. Under the starlight at Tara, Lugh and the Dagda stood in silence, the scent of apples and smoke in the air, as a poet by the fire began a new song for the children. The era of men had begun, but the heart of the island would always belong to the children of Danu. From time to time, a mortal would wander near the high mounds and find themselves invited within. There they would partake in banquets that felt like the happiest days of childhood. But upon returning to the world outside this fairy tale realm, they could never truly know how much time had passed. Sometimes it was a mere year, at other times a century. Breaking their stillness, some would unite with the women of the seed, diving into oceans of time that flowed at different speeds. Yet when they returned, their hair was white and their hearts were shattered. The stories remaining from those fey memories grew as thick as blackberries in the brambles, evoking both wonder and a stern warning. The new boundary between the above and the below began to sing through the calendar. At Cumhaill, the gates swung open. Men left food for those deemed worthy to cross, honoring even their own dead like queens. At Imbolc, the day of Bridget was celebrated with rush crosses, fire, and blessings of water. At Beltane, cattle were driven between rising flames to ensure the health of their hides and the abundance of their milk for the coming summer. At Lughnasadh, men raced and wrestled, while women chose their life partners on the slopes of the hills, remembering Lugh's foster mother and the heavy price paid to turn wild forests into fertile fields. These festivals were celebrated long before the Milesians arrived. Yet these feasts now bore deeper meanings. They held memories of divine rule, while reminding mortals of the laws of mortality written into the year's cycle. Every place and name mentioned stuck to the saga like a thorn, inseparable from the land itself. The legacy of names and the hidden courts. Tailtiu, who was saved by the labors of Meki, continued to be honored through ceremonial games. Eru, Banba, and Fodla took the names they had chosen and guarded them with care. Though the three kings left no heirs to their thrones, they left a legacy of honor that even the conquerors admired. If, whose praises first sparked the invasion, was memorialized by his funeral in lands where his voice was never heard, yet the swiftness of his vengeance proved the truth of his words. The grave of Scota lies in a mountain pass where clouds wander, beside a precipice where people passing below cross themselves without knowing why. The name of Ith continues to light the horizon where the sea meets the sky, at the very spot where his breath was cut short. Meanwhile, the tales of the Tuatha Dé Danann continue to be whispered in the depths of the mounds.
The twilight of the gods was not the extinguishing of light, but the gaining of depth. The Milesians did not erase the traces of those who came before, they built upon them as a foundation. Some nights, cattle would move as if responding to a call from beneath the earth. On some mornings, fishermen marveled at why their boats were secured with knots no human had tied. The old world and the new world thus complemented each other. The Hound of Ulster, Cú Chulainn. The palace at Emin Macha gathered its champions under a roof where the songs of bards dripped like rain. In the north, Ulster stood firm, home to a people who proved a mortal life could shine as brightly as a sacred lamp. They were the Red Branch, a community bound by a tight cord of courage and hunger. Their king was Concobar mac Nessa. His palace was built within earthworks that resembled a sleeping monster. And into that hall stepped a child whose name was not yet etched into the iron of history. Years before, a man named Crunic had boasted that his wife, Macha, could outrun the king's horses. Though she was heavily pregnant, the king forced her to race. She reached the finish line first, but collapsed, giving birth to twins. Before she died, she screamed a curse. For 9 generations, the men of Ulster would suffer the pains of childbirth in their hour of greatest need. This curse hid in the blood like a seed in winter, waiting for the footsteps of a Western queen to awaken it. In the fields of Emin Macha, children were trained with wooden spears. A boy named Setanta asked the way to the palace. He entered the ring alone, and with a grace that mesmerized onlookers, laid low those who attacked him with insults. To cool his battle frenzy, they plunged him into vats of ice-cold water. Steam rose from his shoulders until he grew calm. The story of his name was a reflection of honor. The smith Chulainn had invited King Concobar to a feast, leaving a massive hound to guard the gate. Setanta arrived late, carrying a stick and a ball. When the hound lunged, he did not flinch. He struck the ball into the beast's throat and then dispatched it. Seeing the smith's grief over his lost guardian, Setanta vowed, "I myself shall be your hound." King Concobar declared, "From now on, you shall be known as Cú Chulainn, the Hound of Chulainn." The Cattle Raid of Cooley, Tain Boculnia. Cú Chulainn traveled to the school of the warrior woman Scathach in Alba, Scotland. There he learned to move like a shadow and mastered the gay bulg, a lethal spear of complexity. He returned to Ulster just as a spark of war fell from a distant palace in the west. In Connacht, Queen Meb was weighing her wealth against her husband Eilin's, and realized she lacked one thing, a magnificent white bull called Fionn Benach. But in the valleys of Cooley, there was a brown bull whose fame outshone it, Don Coolenge. When the owner refused to lend it, Meb gathered her army. This was not just about cattle, it was about pride and balance. As the army of the West marched, the curse of Macha took hold. The men of Ulster fell to the ground, racked by the pains of labor. The halls were filled with groans. There were no shields at the passes. Only a youth and his charioteer stood in the way. Cú Chulainn set a simple rule. As long as a champion was sent to fight him in single combat every day, he would grant the army no passage.
He would hold the ford until the men of Ulster could stand. Such a decision was madness, yet it was the only way to guard the honor of a paralyzed people. The battles at the ford could fill a book. Champions came from Connacht and Meath, only to fall before the youth. But the heaviest wound Cú Chulainn received was not from a sword, it was the duel against his foster brother, Ferdiad. They fought for 3 days, changing weapons and tactics. At night, they sent each other food and medicine, but by the 3rd day, the time of chivalry had ended. Cú Chulainn used the secret technique of the Gae Bolg, sending it through the water to pierce Ferdiad's defense. As his friend fell, he held him in his arms and sang a song to honor his passing. Eventually, Ulster rose from its knees. The curse was lifted not by skill, but by the hour of destiny. Conchobar gathered his men, and the Red Branch flowed like a flooded river. Queen Meb, despite her defeat, maintained a brave stance. The cattle raid ended, but the meaning it carried, the cost of pride and the weight of a hero's vow, remained forever. The 2 great bulls finally met, and a lethal struggle began, as if the island itself were nourished by the spilled blood of kings. The brown bull of Cooley tore the white-horned bull asunder, carrying fragments of its body to the east, but in the end, its own heart broke, and it collapsed, its nostrils filled with the dust of its own land. It is said that as it tossed its head, scattering the remains of its foe, even the fields gained names from this slaughter. The land guards these stories like a sacred rosary. The cattle raid ended not with a feast or a peace treaty, but with a profound silence. Courage was replaced by deep exhaustion. None of the stories of Ulster are told in isolation. They are threads in a tapestry of honor and betrayal.
The tragedy of Deirdre and the sons of Usnach. Amidst the roar of the raid, silent tragedies turned kin into enemies. Deirdre was born with a prophecy that her beauty would bring war and sorrow. King Conchobar planned to make her his bride, but her fate was already intertwined elsewhere. Nis, son of Usnach, saw Deirdre and loved her with an unauthorized passion. Together with his brothers, Arden and Ainle, they fled to Alba, Scotland. Years later, Conchobar sent word for their return, promising safety. Though Fergus Mac Roach guaranteed their passage, the king's word was rotten. In a treacherous ambush, the brothers were killed. This betrayal drove Fergus into exile and left Deirdre a captive of a tyrant. Refusing to be a jewel in the crown of a murderer, she dashed her head against a stone while in a chariot, choosing death over a life of forced affection. The Red Branch never forgave Conchobar for this betrayal of justice. The death of Cú Chulainn and the end of an era. The tragedy continued when Cú Chulainn killed a stranger on the shore, not knowing it was his own son, Conla. He had been warned by his teacher, Scatach, never to reveal his name, and the Hound of Ulster could not untie the knot of fate. His end drew near as his enemies learned his geasa, or taboos. He must never eat the flesh of a dog, yet he could never refuse hospitality. 3 hags at a crossroads trapped him between these vows, forcing him to eat a piece of a hound. In his final battle, mortally wounded by a spear, he refused to fall. He tied himself to a stone pillar with his own belt, so that he might die standing, facing his enemies. Only when a raven, the Morrigan, perched on his shoulder, did they realize the soul had fled the body. The Ulster cycle closed in a tragic cycle of blood, proving that a name can be as solid as rock, yet as fragile as glass. The cycle of Fionn mac Cumhaill and the Fianna. As the Red Branch faded, a new brotherhood of hunters and warriors arose, the Fianna. They served the land when no one asked, and the king when the island called. Their leader was Fionn mac Cumhaill.
the Salmon of Knowledge. Fionn's journey to wisdom began under the hazel trees by the river. A poet named Finnegas had spent 7 years trying to catch the salmon of knowledge, which had eaten the nuts of wisdom. While Fionn was cooking the fish for the poet, he burnt his thumb and instinctively put it in his mouth. In that instant, all the knowledge of the world was etched into his mind. Whenever he needed to solve a problem, he would press his thumb against his tooth to gain instant insight. Fionn reclaimed the leadership of the Fianna by saving Tara from a fire-breathing being from the Sidhe, who lulled the court to sleep with music every salmon. Using the tip of a magical spear to keep himself awake through pain, Fionn slew the creature and ended the cycle of shame.
The laws and brotherhood of the Fianna was to be an artist of survival. A candidate had to leap through spears without a scratch, run through forests without breaking a twig, and carry a cup of water at full speed without spilling a drop. They had to be poets, masters of the harp, and sworn protectors of women and the helpless. Fionn's life was marked by both mercy and loss. He married Sadv, a woman who had been turned into a deer by a dark druid. Though the spell was briefly broken, she was lured away again. Their son, Oisin, Little Fawn, became one of the greatest poets of the Fianna. The pursuit of Diarmuid and Grania. Even Fionn was not immune to the bitterness of pride. Grania, daughter of the High King, was betrothed to Fionn, but fell in love with Diarmuid Uadwivne. They fled together, pursued by Fionn for years across caves and forests. Though Fionn eventually forgave them, he later allowed Diarmuid to die from a wound inflicted by a magical boar, withholding the healing water that only his hands could carry. Oisin in Tir na Nog and the meeting with St. Patrick. The age of the Fianna ended at the Battle of Gavra, where the brotherhood was shattered by internal strife and the changing tides of politics. But Oisin survived. He was lured away by Niam of the Golden Hair to Tir na Nog, the land of youth, where no one grows old. Thinking he had been gone for only 3 years, Oisin returned to Ireland on a magical white horse to find that 300 years had passed. When he accidentally touched the ground, the weight of centuries fell upon him, turning him into a frail, blind old man. In his final days, he engaged in long dialogues with St. Patrick. They debated the old ways versus the new faith. Oisin told stories of the Fianna, of where the deer drank, and how justice was served without written laws. He taught that faith and myth could sit on the same bench, for only the narrow-minded believe there is room for only one. The legacy of the mounds. The era of the Tuatha Dé Danann and the great heroes ended with a sunset that was not an extinguishing of light, but a deepening of the soul. The mounds remained, glowing from within on cold nights. The laws of hospitality, the respect for the thorn trees, and the songs of the bards became the bedrock of the Irish spirit. The heroes passed into the earth, but they remain on guard, waiting for the day when the horn is blown 3 times and Ireland calls for them once more. Long before children learn the names of the constellations, they know the hounds Bran and Shealong. Those who have stumbled and accepted their flaws whisper the name of Diarmuid with a regretful respect. Lovers speak to one another as if to prevent desire from turning cruel, and the elders speak of Tir na Nog as if they have walked its golden shores and returned only to finish the day's chores. In Ireland, a crown was never merely a circle of metal. It was a contract between man and the earth. Before Latin was ever etched onto parchment, a king stood upon a high hill and felt the response of the soil beneath his feet. At the heart of this
was Tara. From its heights, the land flowed down like an ancient map, marked not by nameless hands, but by the wheels and feet of centuries. The Lia Fall and the Brehon Laws. Standing upon the hill was the stone of destiny, the Lia Fall. It was said that when a true king set foot upon it, the stone would cry out, not a mere noise, but a resonant promise that the covenant between the ruler and the land was renewed. This kingdom was governed by the Brehon Laws, a system as intricate as the art of a master blacksmith. The judges, or Brehons, could grasp the weight of a case as instinctively as a smith knows when iron is ready for the forge. Their judgments were designed to maintain peace through restitution and honor prices, or eric, ensuring that justice could be served without the endless spilling of blood. Beside them were the Fílid, the poets and scholars, who knew that a well-crafted satire could topple a king more effectively than an army. Cormac mac Art, the wise king. Among the high kings of Tara, Cormac mac Art shone with a light both soft and sharp. His birth was a miracle, guarded by a salmon while he was hidden from enemies. His legacy is found in the Instructions of Cormac, where he counsels his son on the art of ruling without breaking the spirit of the people. Do not quarrel with a poet, for you cannot defeat a satire, he warned. Cormac learned that a king should be a house of justice rather than a wielder of the sword. In one tale, he encountered Manannan mac Lir, the lord of the sea, who gave him a silver branch with golden apples that shook with a soothing melody. Cormac returned with a magical cup that would shatter if 3 lies were told over it, and mend if 3 truths were spoken. It was a reminder, a kingdom built on lies is foundationless. The hag and the kiss of sovereignty. The right to rule was often depicted as a mystical marriage to the land itself. A recurring legend tells of a king who encounters a hideous, ragged hag at a well or a ford. She demands a kiss. If the king recoils in disgust, the land turns away from him. But if he shows her respect and kisses her, she is transformed into a radiant maiden, the personification of sovereignty. The lesson was clear. A true ruler is one who honors and values what others deem worthless.
Niall of the 9 Hostages and the Turning Tide. The ideal of sovereignty reached its peak in the story of Niall of the 9 Hostages. While his brothers failed the test of the hag at the well, Niall embraced her, securing the high kingship for his lineage. His rise marked a shift toward the historical era, where the Neil dynasty would shape Ireland's fate for centuries. As the fires atop the hills began to share the horizon with the stone crosses of the saints, the old lights did not vanish instantly. The monks who recorded these tales were more than just collectors, they were interpreters. They reimagined the ancient gods as kings and heroes, preserving the beloved names of the past, Cú Chulainn, Fionn, Lugh, while weaving them into a new Christian tapestry. The old legal code, the Sensus Mor, survived as a testament to a society that valued foster care, hospitality, and the protection of the poet's truth. Tara remained a place where words and oaths held the weight of mountains. The final echoes. Even when the Fianna became invisible, like the stars at noon, their presence remained behind the light of the day. Ireland continued to breathe through its roads, its fords, and its stories. A king was judged by the hospitality of his hall, the fairness of his judgments, and his ability to hear the silent voice of the island. The tales of the Red Branch and the Fianna remain a warning and a blessing, that a country can be defended by a single heart, but the price is heavy, and that while gold may fade, a story told with truth is the only crown that never tarnishes. A true father never turns his back,
and a true king knows that words can be as sharp and decisive as any blade. As the new rulers met the ancient thrones, history grew darker, yet the secret of true governance remained the same: to hold both the laws and the stones with the gentle firmness of a parent cradling a child. There were those who used Tara merely as a stage for vanity, but when ambition outgrew wisdom, the land withdrew its favor. Drought withered the fields, and the king who ignored his poets was swallowed by a deafening silence. Plague haunted the halls where no comfort could be found. Yet, despite the raids from across the seas and the lonely shadows of falling dynasties, the joy of the stories never truly faded.
Even now, the banquets of the champions are celebrated in the mind's eye. The thunderous echoes of brave armies and the laughter of youths racing at Lugnasad still vibrate in the air. We still tell of the choices made by young women and the tears of the elders, moments that cast a long shadow over grief itself. Happiness resides in a land that knows how to cherish tradition without turning it into a cage. The old melodies are not lost, they have simply drifted to the next hill. The saints listen to the truths of the ancients, and the kings remember that staying true to an oath is greater than saving one's own skin. A lie leaves a fracture in the world, and its only cure is the repeated speaking of the truth. The poet's path. The poets catch the rhythm of the ancient verses. They praise justice and warn against the blinding fog of pride. They remind us, feed the stranger, protect the singer, bow with respect when passing a solitary tree. The cycles are interwoven, inseparable strands of a single golden cord. The gods listen from the high mounds. The heroes fall, but their names become the oaths by which men swear. The Fianna remain in the wild, teaching us the laws of hospitality, while the kings bear the weight of the hill, weighed daily in the harvest and justice. Standing at Tara today is to hear the heartbeat of every legend you have carried. Walk upon its ridges and feel the presence of those who came before. The grass is short, the sky is wide, and the ancient earthworks lie like sleeping giants, listening to the wind. Whisper the names to the air: Cormac, Conair, Neil. Do not forget the ones who dwell in the light and the shadow, the Dagda, Lug, Brigid. Feel how the land takes these names and holds them with a jealous love, never confusing one for the other. The cycles are roots that strike deep into the soil. They are the foundation of a generous home and a warning to any ruler who would place their throne above the people. They are born from the courage of the youth, the patience of the hunter in the rain, and the kindness of the woman whose hearth fire never dies while waiting for a guest. The story may end, but the tradition remains. It pulls up a chair and waits for the next singer to begin. The stones stay warm long after sunset. The waters retain the memory of the spear's touch, and the songs wake up whenever a breath gives them life.